nuclear warhead, do I see it torn down? And there's an army in retreat. I see the old colonials of Europe become united, and perestroika fills the streets. I see the eagle on the shoulder of the bear, or maybe it's the other way around. Is this the calm before the hellfire, or is our tomorrow really heaven bound? But 1990, the blood flows in Bogota, and from Beirut to Johannesburg, the rivers don't stop. 1990, third world children still wander in their boats, their jungles, their deserts, until they drown. It is strange. More we change, rearrange, everything just seems the same as we move into the next century. 1990, please make a liar of me.
Hello and welcome to another show of Caribbeat. I'm Denise Erskine. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraq invaded its oil-rich neighbor Kuwait, which set off a wide range of reactions and concerns within the international arena. The people of the Caribbean region are equally as apprehensive as any other group, both individually and collectively. Our opening poem was written by a son of the Caribbean as he contemplated the developments in the Persian Gulf.
Baghdad boom, Baghdad on the map. Depending on who is speaking, 1922, Sir Percy Cox drew Kuwait-Iraq border. Sheikh Abdul Aziz, Ottoman Empire, Uqair Conference, Baghdad boom, Saudi Arabia aiding Kuwaiti resistance, Kuwait 19 Providence declared, Baghdad boom, Saudi Arabia monarchy, no constitution or elected legislator. What about Iraq's ethnic Kurds, suppressed identity? Kurdish guerrillas, the Palestinian question, South Africa's people of color, human rights. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar 2500th anniversary, Baghdad boom, Baghdad on fire, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, United States, Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Bangladesh, Morocco, Pakistan, Canada, Italy, Belgium, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Australia, Argentina. Strong protecting the weak, the weak, the weak, the weak, the weak becoming strong. Who monitors the strong? Grenada, Panama, Nicaragua, Angola, to name a few. Baghdad boom, Baghdad on fire. Is this the 15th century? Foxholes, trenches, electronic surveillance, laser guns, high technology, weapon simulators, lethal weapons. Is there room for conscientious objectors, students and deserters? Just oppose. Soldiers trained to kill, man killing man. How humanistic. Are we in a declare war zone living inside the US of A? Are we to arm ourselves to guard against aggressors amidst the killings and drugs? What about the 1990 Civil Rights Act? This writer is just asking. Contradictory. Baghdad boom, Baghdad on fire. Soldiers, 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 soldiers. UN Resolution 242, 678, 1990, January 15 deadline. Dr. King's birthday. Preoccupation with the Persian Gulf. Double standards. 12 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstain. What is the frame of reference at home and abroad? Man killing man in a gun culture. Man, stop, think, analyze. See, humanity is losing its way, trapped in the possessive path of destruction and annihilation. How can we recapture human lessons, in particular peace? World leaders, Baghdad boom, Baghdad on fire. Baghdad boom, Baghdad on fire.
On a community level, we've been able to come together in an effort to analyze the situation in the Gulf. The Conference of Caribbean Unity is just one group. which convened a forum recently to discuss the implications of the Gulf War in general and to the Caribbean and her people in particular.
As Caribbean people, and the people of Latin America and Africa as well, we are particularly concerned about this situation in the Middle East because it was last year that a similar action had taken place against Panama. We also had in 1983 similar action in Grenada. We must ask ourselves the question, what does all of this mean? We are also aware of the fact that in spite of whatever contradictions that we might have down there in the Middle East, that war is not the solution to it, inasmuch as there has been several wars since 1948 in that region, and instead of taking the region closer to peace, it has somehow fanned even to a greater degree the flames of war.
We talked with persons in our communities who were willing to share their thoughts and feelings on the war in the Persian Gulf.
I think it's really one of the most unfortunate, tragic, and potentially far-reaching in terms of danger for the people of the world kind of events that has happened for a long time. It is unfortunate because there, in my view, were and still are several options for negotiations of a peaceful settlement that have not been explored in any serious and extended way. It's unfortunate also because there's an institution, the United Nations, who is classically the most appropriate institution to conduct these negotiations, and unfortunately has not been able to play that role in the situation. For a third unfortunate factor, which is that the United States has essentially preempted world opinion by, instead of involving itself in addressing the full array of issues that afflict that region, have focused instead on a single act of aggression, and the invasion of Kuwait is an act of aggression, and use that single act of aggression to extend its military and project its military presence and extend its political presence in a region which is already very, very fragile in terms of peace and fraught with a lot of conflict. I believe, therefore, that what we are witnessing is a situation where might is right, where force is ruling the day, and where better judgment and common sense is not being allowed to prevail because there is apparently an undue haste on the part of the United States to demonstrate that in spite of its economic and other difficulties, it has the power to project itself globally.
I am for the United States going over there. I'm not against, because I was lying in bed when I'm looking at TV, and I was joking, laughing, and says, okay, attack, if that is what you want to do.
We really have to take a hard look at the foreign policy of the U.S. government. We have to look at the fact that the U.S. government really has a foreign policy that is very inconsistent. Whereas on one hand, you have them accepting what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. You have, on the other hand, they are so concerned about what Saddam is doing in Kuwait. So we, as a Caribbean people, really have to be careful, and you have to look, for instance, at Trinidad, with probably the only island in the Caribbean with oil, and the same thing could happen down there. So although Trinidad does not have the sort of oil reserve that Kuwait has, the pattern could still follow us down there.
There have been several instances where the United States has come to the aid of other countries in an effort to encourage democracy. What are some of the thoughts on the U.S. interest in the Gulf region today?
NATO is using the Iraq situation, the Persian Gulf crisis, as the first test case of the post-Cold War order to employ the most sophisticated and most massive concentration of electronic warfare materials assembled any place in the world in history against the Iraqi, to reduce them to talcum powder. in order that this system may demonstrate that it can mobilize itself anytime, any place, and move around the world as a rapid deployment force based upon the doctrine of invincible force to make sure that imperialism survives. We see it in the Caribbean, as Patrick Hilton mentioned, Grenada, 1983, Panama, 1990. We also have seen that the United States is prepared to move militarily in the Western Hemisphere. In 1987, it dispatched a deployment to Bolivia for drug interdiction. It has got a detachment of the Drug Enforcement Administration stationed in the highlands of Peru doing the same thing. It has basically militarized its border with Mexico to prevent the flow of so-called illegal immigrants coming into the United States. But it is also to make sure, with respect to Panama, not so much drug interdiction, but to make sure that the treaty signed to cede the Panama Canal to Panama will not come into effect unless there is a regime in Panama that U.S. imperialism can dominate.
And so it's a combination of economic and political, imperatives that in fact have historically and today, in the case of Iraq, continue to force and impel the United States into the role of being an aggressor as far as these other countries is concerned. I would also like us to reflect on the fact that this is happening at a time when, even as admitted by the U.S. administration, this country has entered an economic recession. And in fact, it has entered that recession at the very time that Japan and Western Europe are on the ascendancy in terms of economic performance. So the singular claim that the United States has enjoyed since after World War II to being the most powerful economy in the world is under siege. And everything that has been attempted thus far internally to redress this recession has not worked. And the upshot of all of that is that the United States used to be able to make up for its lack of economic power by wielding political influence and in fact keeping markets open while in fact protecting its own home markets, for example, for its commodities. That too has been brought under serious threat by the collapse of the recently concluded General Agreement on Tariff and Trade talks, the Uruguay round in Brussels. And so you see a situation where domestic recession, a collapsing of traditionally open world markets for the United States, the rise of two major economic powers in the world in the names of Japan and Western Europe, has left the United States very little options. The only option, the only area of world performance that the United States remains unquestionably dominant is in the area of high technology, especially high technology as it has to do with the military. And this is not an accident. The 10 years under Ronald Reagan in the 80s saw a massive shift in the allocation of money and other resources away from education, health, transportation, important services for the public here in this country, and into the military and industrial research and production activities, sectors of this country. So after 10 years of substantive investment in this area, the United States is undoubtedly in a situation where today it has a lot of new toys, and it needed a war to test out these toys. And Iraq has played right into the hands of the United States as far as that is concerned by providing that opportunity.
These will have serious consequences for the people of the Third World.
Recolonization is not an illusion. It is very possible, and the framework is being established. There is no accident that the old imperialist power of Britain, which has been reduced now to a third-rate beggar on the world stage, is lining up behind Yankee imperialism to help carry out these atrocities. It depends on what the forces of progress in the world, transnationally, not only in the Third World, but progressive and decent people across the world will do to fight this new onset which seeks to set history back beyond anything we have ever imagined. And what it means in the final analysis is that the nation-state system to which we cling so dearly under the rubric of international law is an expiring reality.
Cuba is the only country in Latin America that challenges the so-called New World Order. And I believe that if the United States succeeds with minimal cost in the Iraq war, that the next country to be invaded is Cuba.
Governments of most of the Caribbean nations have denounced Iraq's aggression while supporting United Nations resolutions, the movements of Allied forces, and the U.S. attack on Baghdad on January 16 last. The government of Barbados had this to say.
The government of Barbados regrets that it was not possible to find a peaceful solution to the crisis in the Gulf and that war has broken out. The government and people of Barbados are committed to the principle of peace and development, and war is a contradiction of those principles. We are therefore very concerned about the hostilities provoked entirely by the intransigence of Iraq in invading and occupying a very small and defenseless neighbor. Barbados, as a small country, is very much dependent for its own development on peaceful cooperation with other countries, and recognizes that the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity are fundamental to a peaceful and just international order. Barbados is therefore supportive of the action taken by the United Nations coalition against Iraq. We once again call upon Iraq to withdraw completely and unconditionally from Kuwait in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions. It is our hope that once the present crisis in the Gulf is resolved and the sovereignty of Kuwait is completely restored, that there may be an opportunity to have an international peace conference in the Middle East that would look at all of the obstacles to a just and lasting peace in this troubled region of the world.
Belize and Guyana appear not to condone the U.S. attack, although officials from the Embassy of Guyana were unavailable for comment. Chargé d'Affaires John Murray made this statement at the Organization of American States last Friday.
Guyana hopes fervently that the conflict in the Middle East will come to an early conclusion. And it is also Guyana's expectation that that conclusion would reflect and give effect to the United Nations resolutions in the matter.
The Honorable Forbes Barnum has set the stage for, in terms of intervention. He was strong on one country going, amassing armies and going into another country. Even though during his time we had problems with Venezuela in terms of that border situation. And that had created a lot of problems for us. Belize also had a border dispute. I lately understood that both of these countries were accepted in the OAS, but Guyana has a history of taking a firm stance in terms of non-intervention, and I think it's very important because that's how the leading armies come in and control your way of life. It comes back to the forces intervening into another country. It creates a new kind of lifestyle, new type of living. It shatters the entire society. We had experienced that in Guyana in the early 50s, where we experienced troops not just from the Caribbean but also from Britain. Came down there and it changed the entire complexion of the society. So I think the Guyana government should be commended on its stance.
We are tiny little countries in the Caribbean Sea, important to ourselves, at least, if not to many other people. And we are engaging in grandstanding on the world stage, grand power politics, I mean, it may sound more to me like an ego thing for a prime minister or foreign minister to stand up and say, yes, go ahead, United States, we support you, because really that doesn't begin to address anything. It doesn't talk bread and butter. It doesn't talk jobs, housing, education at all for the people of the Caribbean, in no way at all. Because the United States is certainly now has her eyes fixed mostly on what's going on over there, and certainly figures that the rest of the Caribbean is okay, more or less in shape, especially when our leaders make those kinds of loose statements. I believe what's more in keeping with us as tiny nations is to seek to ensure that there is respect for the international rule of law. Because frankly, that is really what is going to be able to protect us, not any big brother or big sister country. Respect for the international rule of law in terms of respect for boundaries, which is why I agree that we need to condemn Iraq for the invasion of Kuwait. But at the same time, we also need to condemn the United States for its precipitate, aggressive action, not taking into account that there are international institutions and agencies set up to mediate boundary disputes. The International Court of Justice, for example, the United Nations in terms of peacekeeping negotiations, not to have the United Nations through the Security Council scrambling to support a position that has already been set in place by the United States. No, the cart is before the horse in this case. And if it can happen in the case of Iraq and Kuwait, if we have any difficulties, Guyana, Venezuela, Belize, Guatemala, or whatever the case is, we ourselves are going to have set a precedent for bypassing the international rule of law and international institutions which need to come to our aid as tiny countries and tiny states in order to allow us to get justice out of difficult situations. That kind of longer-term vision does not seem to be informing the position being taken by our governments at this time. And it is regrettable, and hopefully there can be some sense that would prevail in the region to allow us to avoid the repercussions from that short-sighted position.
Several families have members who are either already on duty or awaiting assignments in the Gulf region. John and Jean De Silva have 2 children in the military. Their daughter is stationed in England while their son is at Andrews Air Force Base. They share their feelings.
Really, we had 3, but one of them is out. And 2 is in there now. And to know that Uncle Sam don't care, even if you have 9 or 10 kids in there, all that they need is your service. Because looking at these Vietnam people that serve the country, eventually they come back in the States here, what benefits they're getting? Nothing to talk about.
Anytime might be your son time to go, so that is, you constantly think about it, you don't really sleep through the night without turning television on to know, well, is it over? It's finished? What's going on? You don't sleep really good, really, you don't really sleep.
For communities such as ours unfamiliar with the devastation of warfare, support groups are essential at this time.
And I would strongly urge community organizations, particularly Caribbean organizations, to hastily begin addressing the business of setting up social and psychological counseling support systems for the families of those children who are out in Saudi Arabia. Because even if they come back alive, they're going to come back, as Vietnam proved, different people, with a different perception of the world, with different values and with different problems. And fortunately, the Caribbean community in most cases is one that also has access to people who are trained in all these related fields of social psychology and counseling and so forth. And one thing that our institutions, our community organizations can very usefully do is to set about assembling support teams, set about finding out who in our communities, whether it be Washington or Baltimore, which are the families who have children over there. Let's start counseling the parents, because they need help now, they need support now. They need to understand that when people, for instance, demonstrate against the war, that people are not demonstrating against their sons and daughters, but people are demonstrating against the people who made the decision precipitately to go to war instead of negotiating and seeking a peaceful settlement. And so they need to know that people have not, condemned them as being bad people and devils. Then they need to know that, for instance, the week or so before their children are coming back, if they're coming back alive, that yes, their children are going to come back, and these are going to be some of the things on their minds. These are going to be some of their concerns, and this is how you can deal with it. And here are some community forums, community support groups, that you can have access to. God forbid if a child is coming back in a body bag, that parent also needs to be helped to deal with that. Friends and community and church and so forth need to be assembled and need to be ready, because we have a different kind of war to be fought, which is the war to keep cohesion in our communities, to keep our community, to keep and resuscitate and revitalize the family structures in our communities that have been torn apart by our children being taken away to do the biddings of a military industrial complex.
If you have a small family, like I don't have a very large family here, most of my people is back home. I'm the largest family here, you got to say, is my kids and so on. I don't have like aunts and uncles and cousins and all of this. So, and I guess they have a lot of other people that don't have extended family, that have people that is in the military, that need people to talk, that understand each other's feelings as West Indians, to say, well, let's talk and how we feel.
As we end tonight's show, the conflict in the Middle East remains unresolved. Here in the U.S., we have just honored Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who spent a lifetime promoting peaceful solutions to conflict. In memory of Dr. King, Jamaica's ambassador to the U.S. pays this tribute.
Jamaicans join with people throughout the United States in saluting the life and work of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King left to us a legacy of hope and an example of selfless struggle. His championship of the civil rights movement in the United States is one of the true triumphs of human endeavor that we have witnessed in recent history. Jamaica was honored to play host to Dr. King on several occasions. I well recall helping to make arrangements for one of his visits in which he laid a wreath at the shrine of our national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Messiah Garvey. And then, in 1968, we paid tribute to him posthumously by conferring on him the Marcus Garvey Prize for Human Rights. That award was our nation's special honor commemorating the International Year for Human Rights. On a visit during the difficult years of the civil rights struggle, Dr. King said of Jamaica, and I quote, "It is always a heartening and enriching experience when I can be in a situation when I feel like I'm somebody. In Jamaica, I really feel like a human being."
Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our show. We'll be back next week at the same time with more on Caribbeat. I'm Denise Erskine.
I was born in the USA, but because of my color, I'm suffering today. Because of my color, I'm suffering today. The white man preaching democracy, but in truth and in fact it's hypocrisy. Truth and in fact it's hypocrisy. So we want Martin